Welcome to Real Estate Coaching Radio, starring award-winning real estate coaches and #1 international best-selling authors, Tim and Julie Harris. This is the #1 daily radio show for realtors looking for a no BS, authentic, real-time coaching experience. What's really working in today's market, how to generate more leads, make more money, and have more time for what you love in your life. And now your hosts, Tim and Julie Harris.
Welcome back. So I have a question for all of you. Is the market ready to explode? And by explode, I mean get marketably better. And here's what will light the fire. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to talk to you guys about interest rates. And we're going to talk to you about why we think what we're going to be experiencing really effectively starting, I think, mostly in the first quarter of next year, is going to be one of the biggest, I don't even know what word to use, recovery, resurgent, real estate boom that many of you have ever experienced in your real estate careers or ever will experience in your real estate career. Maybe excluding probably what happened during COVID when there were 6.5 million home sales, but something akin to an absolute real estate boom.
That's right. So the magic number is 5.5%. Why is that? Well, according to the John Burns Research and Consulting, known as JBREC, 71% of homeowners who plan to purchase their next home with a mortgage won't accept a rate above 5.5%. This is a critical number for agents to watch because it represents a fundamental threshold that influences homeowner behavior. We're going to talk about what that means to you now because you don't have 5.5 yet. So point number 2, we're going to give you the facts and then what to do. Number 2, consumer perception of, quote, normal rates. The survey revealed that 62% of consumers believe a historically normal mortgage rate is below 5.5%. Even though that's not actually true, people believe that because it was low for so long. This perception impacts their buying decisions, and it's vital to align client expectations with current market trends.
But the reality of it is when interest rates are over 5.5%, with inflation adversely affecting so many other aspects of our lives, you know, a couple hundred extra bucks when you're already spending a couple hundred extra bucks on just about everything is a significant amount of money. Mm-hmm. And there's obviously a lot of other things that are going to be skyrocketing in cost, like, you know, property insurance and all these other factors that go into homeownership, or just, you know, paying all of your bills every month. So what we're going to see is mortgage interest rates are absolutely going to drop. There are going to be a lot of interesting mortgage programs that are going to come around the bend because of the fact that there's never been a meaningful recovery in any economy, though I don't think we're in a recession. There is no reason to believe that we are. But we're definitely not in any sort of economic surge, not just in housing, but anything else. But there's never been a real return to a boom economy that hasn't led with real estate, hasn't led with housing. So anybody that knows anything about anything is going to know that housing has to start booming because here's an interesting fact. It's mostly psychological. How did you, dear listener, feel, say, 4 or 5 years ago? You know, were you feeling more optimistic? Were you feeling more excited? I'm not making political, nothing. And Julie and I don't do politics on this show. But how did you feel? How were you different? Were you planning more vacations? Were you looking forward to more things? Do you remember at all how you felt? Well, I'll tell you a way to check to see how you were feeling. Go back in time 4 to 5 years ago and look to see what you were buying, because what you were buying was indicative of how you were feeling. Because when you're not feeling optimistic and enthusiastic and you don't think your tomorrow is going to be better than your today, chances are you're not buying anything. And so when you hear about prices, essentially being reduced and falling on things other than real estate, it's because most people are in a emotional quagmire of not feeling the level of optimism they need to feel in order to do the other things that will require them to make an investment into their future. That's the bottom line. So how did you feel in the past? How do you feel now? So what you need to do, and the psychological trick here ultimately, is to accept the fact that the market is going to get marketably better, but don't wait for it to get better before you start doing the actions that would naturally occur, the behaviors you would naturally have if it were better. So if you wait around for everyone else to feel, like, oh my gosh, we're finally in a boom market again, you'll have waited too long. You need to start acting and thinking like it's already arrived, because then you're going to already experience the momentum as the market improves, while all your competitors wake up to the fact that, hey, guess what? It turns out Bob did know what the hell he was doing 6 months, a year ago, And that is the reason Bob was being more ambitious. And that is the reason Bob was being more proactive with his lead generation. That is the reason that Bob wasn't sitting on the sidelines waiting for the clouds to clear. You guys get it? You have to do the opposite of what most people are doing. This is true in all aspects of your life. Julie, next point.
Next point is that higher rates do equal limited demand, but we're going to explain how to curtail that, how to combat that. Only 13% of homeowners are willing to accept, quote, accept a mortgage rate between 6.5% and 6.9% for their next home purchase. Higher rates significantly reduce the pool of active buyers, making it essential for you, agents, to educate clients on what? Creative financing options that can lower their rates.
So what we're going to be doing is Julie's going to show you different strategies that you can actually, existing mortgage rates can be positioned at 5.5% or lower. But before we get to the next point, I do want to say this. And this is something that Julie and I have talked about on this podcast before. And we've actually had some people challenging us on it because they weren't willing to do the work and research what Julie and I had researched ourselves. So you can do an assumable mortgage on virtually every government-backed loan. And over 90% of all mortgages out there are government-backed loans. And so how does that work? It has to be done with the lender's approval. But there is a form, and we're including this. You're going to get all kinds of education on this in our Ethical Real Estate Professional Designation Program that's coming out soon. Make sure if you're not on the wait list to get into that program, you text the word buyer, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372. Text the word buyer to 47372 to be included in the initial launch group of Ethical Real Estate Professional. But there is a way that you can assume an existing mortgage. So let's say, for example, you go out and list a house today and the mortgage rate is 30-year fixed at 3.5%. And let's say that buyer or that seller's owned that house for 5 years. There's 25 years left on the mortgage. The seller has, say, $250,000 in equity. Now, listen to what I'm saying. If a buyer, wants to buy the house, and they can cash the seller out of their equity, in other words, give them $250,000, and they have to qualify. They have to qualify just as if they were applying for the mortgage in the first place. They can assume the existing 3.5% mortgage with the assuming term of 20, or with the remaining term of 25 years. You guys get it? So someone can walk in and they can assume an existing mortgage with essentially by cashing the seller out of their equity. Now, a lot of loan officers don't know about what I just said. And a lot of loan officers that do know about what I just said don't want you to know about what I just said, because from what I understand, they don't make any commission on deals like that. They make commissions on new originations. They don't make any commissions on assumptions. An assumption takes usually 45 to 60 days for approval as well.
Totally worth it, though. I think people would agree.
Hell yeah. And so almost every single one of you going on listing appointments, almost every single one of your sellers are going to have assumable mortgages. So if you know what I just told you, if you know actually how to bring that to the table when you're trying to list a property and explain to the seller how you're going to be able to help them make their house 1,000x more appealing, because you do know how to actually make it so that the prospective buyer can just assume their mortgage, thus making their house much more appealing. You guys understanding what I'm getting at here? Then obviously you're going to have an unfair advantage in the marketplace. So text the word buyer, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372. Julie, point number...
All right. So we're still on how to get the lower rate, right? Which is what you explained with the assumable, my favorite way to do that. And I just wanted to hover there for a second, because how do you find out for sure? Probably it is. All FHA, all VA, and all USAA loans are assumable. But how do you find out for sure? It's in the loan documents. The sellers have that.
All right, let's go on to point number 4. Point number 4 is the lock-in effect is easing.
That's right. So while the lock-in effect, what is that? That's where homeowners hesitate to sell due to their low existing mortgage rates. It is still strong, but it's beginning to weaken. This is why we're seeing more listings come to market. As agents, staying ahead of this trend and preparing for potential uptick in sales activity is vital. Remember, the title of this podcast is the upcoming recovery, if you want to call it that, being ready. We're already seeing this with the uptick in inventory, as we reported on.
Well, but Julie, do you really think, I think there's something to the lock-in effect from low interest rates?
Yeah.
But personally, I think it's mostly BS.
I think it's waning.
It's waning. Well, right. That was your point. But I don't really think it was ever really a thing in the first place. I don't think there's too many people that have to sell their home that are really giving a rat's ass about interest rates. They're the want to sell their homes. Those are more interest rate sensitive.
Yeah.
But the people that were looking to sell their homes, that had to sell their homes.
Oh, you mean real motivation, right?
Real motivation. Yeah. They didn't care what interest rates were.
No, I agree. They're moving because of circumstances, not because of rates.
Right. So it took out the recreational sellers, but it didn't take out the real sellers. And there's a lot of recreational sellers in the marketplace. But the other thing is the real problem wasn't the interest rates. The real problem was inventory. If there was more inventory, the prices wouldn't have escalated so much.
True.
And you would have had, more buyers being able to buy homes, because after all, an interest rate is something you can refinance out of. And so people saying, for example, well, I'm going to wait for interest rates to drop below 5.5% before I buy a home. Well, the same thing is being said by most other buyers that aren't thinking the process through. That house for $500,000 that you want to buy, let's say it's 6-8 months from now, and interest rates are finally 5.5%, which is probably what it's going to be. You're going to then be competing with a lot more buyers who are also making the same decision. Is that going to drive the price of the home up, or is it going to drive the price of the home down? Obviously, the house is going to be more expensive. So even with the lower interest rate, you're probably going to be paying the same, if not more, than had you just purchased the house now and then refinance the house in 8 months to the lower interest rate. That's called having your cake and eating it too.
Yeah, and if you wait and the price is higher, you're also coughing up a lot higher down payment.
That's right. Oh, by the way, you want the notes for today's podcast? Of course you do. If you've not yet become a subscriber to our coveted newsletter, please subscribe to harrisrealestatedaily.com. harrisrealestatedaily.com is the only place where you can get all of our notes. You can use these notes, especially today's notes, for social media. You can use them for training yourself, obviously, your team, your brokerage, whatever you want to use them for. They're waiting for you only over at harrisrealestatedaily.com. Just drop in your email address into the little box, and then you have to confirm you want the subscription with your email. We'll send you a quick email. You say, yep, I want the email. I want the daily newsletter, and then you're going to start getting it along with all of our notes in that day's podcast. So do not procrastinate, harrisrealestatedaily.com.
All right, point number 5, 5.5% is a benchmark, not a barrier. Remember, nearly 40%, and I looked this up to be certain, nearly 40% of home purchases this year were all cash. That's the highest it's ever been. It's usually like 28%. So don't assume that every buyer in your pipeline even cares at all about rates.
Now, so that statistic is that all cash comment is a little bit like that takes the wind out of a lot of people's sails because they don't have all cash.
Right.
But you also got to look at what the average, like where's that cash coming from? The sale of another home. That's almost always where it's coming from. And don't be manipulated into believing there's all these BlackRocks or Blackstone or whatever it is that are coming in and buying corporate housing. Julie and I debunked that. Of all, let's say, scaled up home purchasers, I think home buyers, institutional home buyers, I think our criteria was owning more than 100 homes.
And they had to be single family too.
And single family homes, it was less than 3%.
That's right.
Of all the homes in America are owned by any kind of corporation. So when you hear politicians say home prices have gotten really expensive because all these evil corporations are buying up real estate and making all citizens of the United States tenants, that is a 100% a very easily verified lie, and they're just saying that to try to basically get people to be all up in arms and say, "Oh my God, I'm going to vote for Bob," and then Bob's somehow going to, tame the evil corporations, and I'm finally going to be able to buy a house. It's just not true.
It's not true. They own multifamily, but when we're talking about single family, it's less than 3%, guys. Okay, so what happens if and when rates do drop below 6%? Well, the broader shift in the housing market might not occur in a big way until they're less than 6%, but again, we're predicting that too. We've already seen when rates get anywhere near 6%, new mortgage applications rise almost immediately. And remember, refer to last week's podcast. We did an entire podcast dedicated to 3 different ways of achieving 5%, 4%. Some builders are buying down the rate to 1.875%. You can still achieve that. You just aren't doing it with a 30-year fix.
And we also did a podcast. You guys can find this over on iTunes, or obviously if you're a newsletter subscriber, look for an archive podcast about a month ago, comparing the housing policies of Trump versus Harris.
Yeah.
So you guys can compare which one you think would be better for housing long-term or even short-term. And it's all laid out. And frankly, we could even update that podcast. Even more information has come out about which programs are going to be best. And I'll give you guys a little secret. The person that actually sold real estate for a living might have some better insights on what's best for the real estate industry. So draw your own conclusions when you listen to that podcast. Point number 7.
Okay, point number 7 is educating your clients on that creative financing that, again, we did a dedicated podcast to. Now is the time to educate clients on ways to achieve a 5.5% or lower mortgage rate through strategies like rate buydowns, adjustable rate mortgages, and paying discount points. Agents who proactively offer solutions can help clients move forward despite rate challenges or perceived rate challenges. You, listeners, should know what the best builder rates are in your market, for example. Some builders are subsidizing rates as low as 3 or 4%. Last week, we reported on one that was less than 2% for at least the introductory year.
This is a good place to drop in, Jules, that you can stack programs, right?
Yes, you can mix programs.
Okay, so tell them what that means.
Well, so for example, maybe you have a first-time buyer that qualifies for down payment assistance funds that some lenders are doing. Okay, so they get 3% towards their closing costs, maybe even 5%. They can also do an adjustable rate mortgage where they lock in a lower rate for the first 3 years or the first 5 years.
Well, they could do, like, for example,
they could buy down a point too.
Well, so they could do all of those things, right?
Yeah.
They could do down payment assistance program. They could do, say a 723 where it's fixed for whatever, adjustable rate mortgage.
Yep.
They then could buy the interest rate down on the adjustable rate mortgage. But I'll tell you something. I actually studied with our mortgage expert. I talked to him on Friday. Is that right now the government mortgages are actually cheaper and have less PMI. So that's not normal. But if you go, and again, like over 90% of all mortgages are Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they're government backed. Those mortgages actually are better for any consumer to get than conventional mortgages. If you've been in the real estate business for more than a blink, you'll know that almost always the government stuff is more expensive. That's not the case anymore.
And the purchase price limitations are very high now.
Yeah, exactly. So like when Julie and I sold real estate, this was for the country, okay? I think the max loan amount you could get when we sold real estate, like in the most expensive areas, was like $472.
That's right.
Something like that.
Like for a really long time, it was
right.
$470.
And when probably 10 years ago, I think it was like $650.
Yeah.
But now you can get the max loan amount in some markets is, didn't you and I?
It's close to $1 million in
Yeah,
some places. In the most expensive
It's
markets.
like $930 or
Yeah,
something.
yep.
But that's the loan amount. So if you have somebody that wants to purchase a house for $1.3 million and they think they have to get essentially a conventional mortgage, let's say, not have the benefits of the government-backed mortgages, they put down the difference between the purchase price and the max loan amount. They're going to be able to walk into a situation where they're probably going to have less closing costs and less private mortgage insurance. So these are all things to keep in mind. By the way, we're really going to educate you guys up in Ethical Real Estate Professional with regards to all of these nuanced mortgage things like what we're talking about today. So if you love what you're getting on today's podcast, make sure you guys are getting on the wait list for Ethical Real Estate Professional. Text the word BUYER, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372. Text the word BUYER, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372. And also, if you want to check out what Ethical Real Estate Professional is going to be all about, you can actually go to the website. It went live last week, ethicalrealestateprofessional.com. And you can check out and get the gist of what the actual program is going to be. It's an exclusive program. It's only going to be available for 2,500 agents ever. And that's the way we're going to run it. So this is going to be what we feel is going to be one of the most, if not the most prestigious designation in the real estate industry. So ethicalrealestateprofessional.com if you want to check it out. But in the meantime, you absolutely positively want to get on the list to be invited to the launch webinar, which hopefully will be happening any week now. And to do that, you have to text the word BUYER, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372. All right, Julie, point number 8, positioning yourself as a market expert.
That's right. Last but not least, positioning yourself as a market expert. So how many of your buyer prospects are actively looking for their next home right now? Are they going to open houses without you? Are they visiting new construction without you? How many contacts are you making to your database daily? Do you know who is actively looking? Do you know who is thinking about those rates?
So what this point of this is you got to know what the buyers in your market are actually thinking and feeling. Don't just rely on even us. You got to go and talk to people. You're going to have to be proactively going out there and having conversations. But what everyone's going to want to know are just the things you should always have at your fingertips with regards to interest rates and all these different things that we just talked about. Like, how many of you knew about assumable mortgages? How many of you right now are peeing your pants with excitement, looking for the opportunity to share your newfound wisdom with a prospective buyer or seller about the fact that the mortgages are assumable? And yes, Mr. Prospective Buyer, you can get that mortgage from that, for 2.8%. Because this turns out this listing I just took has a 30-year fixed at 2.8%. The seller has $100,000 equity. You are going to put $100,000 down on a house anyway and settle for, say, a 6.7% mortgage. I can get you into this one for less than 3%, same down payment. Let's go to town. Let's write the offer.
Yeah, here's another test. If you're listening and you are a listing agent and you're sitting on 3, 5, 10, 15 listings, and let's say 30% of them just are not getting very many showings. I read an article this morning that said about half the country has shifted into officially a buyer's market.
Thank God.
Yeah, it depends on where you are and the price range and all the rest. But let's say that you're that listing agent and you've got, like many of our coaching clients do, a lot of listings. The ones that aren't selling right now, and maybe all of them, do you know if they have assumable mortgages? That could be the key to getting them sold. When you're filling out the MLS worksheet, and it says, you guys are used to checking whether it could go FHA or not FHA, if it's conventional or seller financing. Okay, so you can also check the little box that you didn't know existed called assumable. So you can, many MLSs, you can even search, if you're on the buyer side, you can search your MLS with your normal searches for assumable mortgages.
You're going to have to educate every single human you know about what we just told you. But that's the greatest way, the advantage you're going to have in the marketplace is when you pridefully tell everybody, you tell the world, you're an ethical real estate professional agent and you specialize, obviously one of your specializations is exclusive buyer agency. We are going to give you such a vast amount of knowledge and confidence that when your new year starts, you literally are going to be bouncing off the walls with excitement because you are going to finally have something to truly differentiate yourself in the marketplace, not just you doing a bunch of social media and branding, trying to be an influencer, trying to convince everyone you're something that you're not in terms of being like maybe you just got a real estate license and you're now falling prey to someone saying, well, the first thing you got to do is act like you're already successful at selling real estate. And, then eventually people will be convinced that you're successful at real estate and they'll want to do business with you. That's called faking it. And you never make it when you do the only way to truly make it is to actually put in the work and do the real work. Do the real work of real estate. Become somebody of value so that they will value enough to want to do business with you. Doesn't that make sense? Isn't that how you go about choosing who you're going to work with? What products you're going to buy, not based on a bunch of hanky-janky social media posts and marketing and branding, but based on actual real earned reputation. Isn't that ultimately how you want to be found and discovered and how the business you want to be, building your business around? Of course, a real reputation has to be earned. It cannot be bought. It cannot be manufactured. Ethical real estate professional is going to give you that backbone that all you've been looking for. It is going to be the differentiator that you need in the marketplace. Text the word buyer to 47372. That is your homework from today's podcast. Anything else you'd like to say to these guys?
Well, if you're tired of reading the headline that you must learn to articulate your value, and you are tired of wondering how in the world you're going to do that, we gave you a lot to chew on this podcast, and Ethical Real Estate Professional answers that question.
So remember, the only way to get on the invite list is to text the word buyer, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372. Do that now. You can do that while you're listening to this podcast. In the meantime, have a fantastic day. I'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.